Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we will be covering the remaining 20 questions of UGC Psychology, Paper 2 for June 2014 examination for UGC NET. So we'll start with a set of questions. Here is the first question that we will be covering today. So a test involves presentation of pair words like father, daughter, and the subject is given is required to list as many ways in which they can pair the relationship. So if the subject is being asked to pair in as many ways as the subject can, that means he is talking about divergent production, or the main focus is on the creativity. And then since the words are father, daughter, they have their meaning in themselves. So it's kind of semantic. So it's a kind of divergent production of semantic relationships. The next question is, we have to match the following, the thoughts, the list of phenomena and the description. So what is thought? Thought is basically a language of mind. Whatever comes to my mind is a thought. So it's a kind of language of mind. What is concept? When I try to represent an entire class, it becomes a concept. I say apple falls due to gravity. So that's a concept. So all the apples falling from the tree or anything that's falling would represent a common class, and that would be related to the concept of gravitational field. Next is prototype. Prototype is something or a property that best exemplifies the concept. That means when you are trying to explain the concept in a much more elaborate manner, it is known as a prototype. Okay, the next here is categorization. If I say all these are small children, all these are class 1 students, and all these are class 10 students, what I am trying to do, I am trying to categorize students based on their age group and their classes. So it's a process of assigning object to a concept or class. So that is what is known as categorization. So we have understood all the 4 terms here. The next question is again a match the following question. So you have a list of features here that you have to match, and it's based on the chapter of memory. So loss of memory of events prior to an event. That means whatever has happened before the event, that memory I have lost, and that is known as the retrograde amnesia. Amnesia is loss of memory, and prior, that means retro, and after means entero. So I have a good way to help you remember this. A for A. So anything which is after the event you are not remembering anything. So A and A. So after the event is entero grade amnesia. Now, mental processes that is not readily under control. What are those? Mental processes that are not readily under our control are kind of contamination. Why we call it contamination? We call it contamination because it is not being influenced by anything on our surrounding, and it readily flows out of our mind. For example, feeling of jealousy. If you are feeling jealous to someone else, okay, you are not willing that you must feel jealous to your brother or sister or your relative or someone, but it readily flows out due to some instant thing that happened. So that is what is mental contamination. And finally, what is retrieval inhibition? Retrieval inhibition is when you are trying to block the information in the memory that we don't try to remember. So it's basically you need to retrieve it or you need to remember it again, but you are suppressing it or blocking that information, and you are unable to retrieve it or re-remember it when you need it. So that is what is retrieval inhibition. The next question here talks about learning. So you have the classical conditioning experiment. Now, it's basically Anita is being given chemotherapy, and when she is offered chemotherapy, she feels nauseatic. So chemotherapy causes nausea. So this is what is an unconditioned response. Okay, because of chemotherapy, she is having nausea, and that's obvious. someone can have it. But slowly and gradually, what happens after repetitive visit to the doctor's office, even when she is not given a chemotherapy, she feels nauseatic. And that is what is where the conditioning has happened, and that is a kind of conditioned response. She is not willing to give that kind of response, but due to successive visits with chemotherapy and relation of nausea with chemotherapy, she now feels, even if the chemotherapy is not there, she feels nauseatic. That is a kind of conditioned response. The next question, we try to understand the law of grouping in perception. Okay, so we talk about perceptual grouping. Now there are four basic concepts in perceptual grouping. Those are similarity, proximity, closure, and continuity. So if there is dot, then I feel that this is the correct continuation. If I have drawn this much, I feel this should be circular, so I can close it. If these four points are this much close, I feel all the 4 points should be this much close. And if I have written A, B, C, D in big letters, there should be similarity. So I am writing E, F, G, H also in big letters, not in the small letters. So now let's understand which of these four are available here. So you have closure, you have proximity, and you have continuation. So which do not belong to the perceptual grouping? The answer is figure ground and common theme. Next is a very simple question indeed. You just need to know the basic facts, and it's based on direct rote learning. So you are given the numbers and you have to find out how many numbers correspond to which thing. So lobes of the cerebrum, you have 4 lobes. You have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. So 4 lobes of the brain. You have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Then you have 31 pairs of cranial nerves which take to the brain, 12. Then the spinal nerves which take to the spinal cord are 31. And finally cervical vertebra are 7 in numbers. Okay. So this is a kind of very direct question. Does not require much effort. The next question here is based on assertion reason. Now try to understand this. This question is first of all based on quasi-experimental studies. So we must first understand what is quasi-experimental studies. Quasi-experimental studies is kind of a study where you are trying to find out the impact of intervention. So for example, I am performing an experiment on a group of 20 students. Okay, I get a result X. Now what I do, I try to intervene that experiment and I try to provide interventions or obstructions so as that experiment is completed, and I want to see the impact of that intervention. For example, if I create a lot of noise during the experiment, I want to see the impact of noise on the experiment. So that is what is understanding a kind of quasi-experimental quasi-experiment. So it's basically carried out in non-equivalent groups. It's a very simple form. So for quasi-experiment, what you require is pre-test and post-test. So with noise and without noise, you have 2 sets, and then you treat them and you compare them. So while comparing, what you try to do, analysis of covariance. Okay. So the first thing is they are performed in non-equivalent groups. The second thing, now here the question says secondary variance is less efficiently controlled. Now what is secondary variance? The effect of independent variable would reflect as primary variance. Okay. So the effect of dependent variable or the variations in dependent variable would lead to primary variance. Now what is secondary variance? Secondary variance is a kind of variance that is dependent on, that is a kind of variance due to dependent variable, but it is systematically associated to the other identifiable variables. And finally, you have error variance. What is error variance? Error variance is kind of unpredictable and unsystematic error that occurs. in an experiment. So secondary variance, how can you control the secondary variance in an experiment? The secondary variance can be controlled by few of the things. The first is the kind of randomization we can do. We can keep the secondary variance as constant. We can keep it as constant. Then what we can do is we can provide a systematic variation. Okay, after every 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, this should happen. And finally, there should be kind of a statistical adjustment that should happen. So these are the major phenomena that we discuss here. So both assertion and reason are correct, and but they are not related to one another, or we cannot say one explains another. The next question here is about the self-determination theory. Self-determination theory, there are three terms that are that are part of self-determination theory is autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So 1, 2, and 5. So C is the correct answer. Now let me explain what is self-determination theory or humanistic view of motivation. Self-determination theory talks about basically the motivation which is goal-directed. So it explains the goal-directed behavior of any person. Now it talks about two things. Clock. One is internal clock and another is external clock. What is internal clock? Internal clock implies the forces that comes from within. So it's kind of initiator and sustainer for my own action. So internally something comes out of me that I want to do is kind of internal clock, and that leads to clock is basically perceived locus of causality. So what is the center of that cause? So that is the internal clock, and that leads to intrinsic motivation. I'm motivated from my within myself. Okay, and external clock leads to extrinsic motivation. Now we understand internal clock, we understand external clock. Now in the self-determination theory, what was given were the three basic components, that is competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Relatedness means how two phenomena A and B are related to one another is relatedness. Autonomy is basically trying to controlling your life. So I don't want someone to control my life, so I am autonomous. Okay, and finally is competence. Competence is basically succeeding in whatever you do. I need to be very competent with the foreign market, for example. So I want my domestic market to rise as much as the foreign market is doing. So that is competence. Now the next question is a very interesting question. It's a question basically on a term known as Sative test. So what is it basically? So it's a test in which the average of sub-scales is same. Okay. So what is happening in MCT test? It's basically used as a descriptor in psychology, where we try to measure or compare two options. So I have two options and try to compare those two, and I try to see which of the two is the best. If I feel A is the best, I'll pick A. Okay, so that is what I'm trying to do in an incentive test. It's a kind of forced choice scale, and you are trying to compare significant differences in the subtests. So you have two subtests, A and B, and I'm trying to find out substantial differences between the two. Now, the next question is, what is self-concept here? Okay. So the concept of self-concept is whatever is within myself or my perception, my own perception of something about me is self-concept. So for example, I feel I can do this thing very nicely, so that's my own perception about myself, that I am good at psychology. For example, yeah, I am good at the economics. Okay, so that is kind of self-concept. I have my own concept that I can do the good in this field, so I should go or opt for psychology as a profession. So that is self-concept. But it is also about your thinking or your thought process. So it's your own vision about yourself and your own thought process. Then it follows some general laws of perception. That is for sure that every concept that is in existence in the world should follow some laws and principles of perception. And definitely it is an organized, coherent and integrated pattern. So 1, 2 and 3 are the correct options here. while we develop self-confidence, we cannot say we are following a specific timetable. Now the next is Guilford's model on intelligence. The correct choice here is 1, 2, and 3. Now let me explain. Guilford gave 5 operations, okay, 6 products, and 5 contents. So he gave 5 into 6 into 5, that is 150 combinations in all for any intelligence. So 150 components. So for operations, the components were convergent production, divergent production. Okay. Then you have cognition, memory, and evaluation. Now for products, you have units, relations, classes. Then you have systems, transformations, and implications. And finally, you have 5 kind of contents. That is auditory, visual, symbolic, semantic, that is understanding, and behavioral. So these are the things which are considered under the Guilford's model. Now the next question talks about few of the terms that you might have not have heard about. So let's understand the terms first. What is algorithm? Algorithm we discussed in the previous set of questions also. It's kind of a step-by-step procedure to solve a problem. So algorithm is a step-by-step procedure to solve something. Now, what is representative heuristics? Representative heuristics means I'm trying to make judgment about the probability of event which is uncertain. So I don't know whether it is happening or not happening, but I'm trying to say what is the probability of the event under that condition. The next is anchoring and adjustment. So what is meant by anchoring and adjustment? It is a kind of psychological heuristics where you try to intuitively assess the probability of something that is about to happen. So you have one reference point, that is the anchor, and based on that reference point, which is the anchor, you try to make adjustments. Now what is metacognitive process? It's obviously expanding our level of awareness and how we observe the things around us by solving the various problems. Metacognition is basically thinking about one's own thinking. Okay, for example, I am thinking that today the weather is not good. I should not go to school. I should not send my son to school, for example. So that is my thought process. Now back on that, I am thinking again. If he won't go today, what are the losses that he might face? Is it good or is it bad? So I'm trying to find out the pros and the cons. So based on that, I am thinking of what I have already thought. So metacognition is basically thinking about your own thinking. The next question again is on memory. So memory, as we can see, is an important topic. A lot of questions coming up for memory. A network of associated facts and concepts that make out general knowledge of the world is the semantic memory. Semantic memory is based on understanding. So when we are talking about something, the facts and the components that are based out of our general knowledge or knowledge about the world is basically the semantic knowledge. Our next question is a very interesting question. The only way I would like to explain is through a simple diagram. So you have the question here. Okay, so here are the list of words. So you have trace simultaneous conditioning, trace conditioning, backward and delay conditioning. The only way I would like to explain is by means of this diagram. Okay, so you have a diagram here, and that explains all the 4 phenomena. Now, there is a conditioned stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus. Okay. So you have light. After you give a light, you give shock. So that is delay conditioning. So after giving the light, a dog can feel that he must be getting food, but after a few minutes he gets a shock. So that is a kind of delay conditioning. What is trace conditioning? You have given the light got on and it got off. After it got off, you gave dog a shock. So that is trace conditioning. So the effect of light has gone and then he got a shock. The next is you give light and shock together. That is simultaneous conditioning. And finally you have backward conditioning, in which first you give shock followed by light. Okay. So this is how we understand the concept of delay conditioning, trace conditioning, simultaneous conditioning, and backward conditioning. Based on that, we can easily relate that if unconditioned stimulus occurs before conditioned stimulus, it's backward conditioning. Conditioning stimulus and unconditioned stimulus begin and end at the same time. So it is simultaneous conditioning. The onset of conditioned stimulus precedes the unconditioned stimulus. So that is this. It is delay conditioning. Onset of unconditioned occurs while the conditioned stimulus is still present. Okay. So here we say it's a kind of trace conditioning. Next. The next is an interesting question. Here we would be understanding what is phi phenomena. So phi phenomena is basically an optical phenomena or which leads to illusion of movement. So what happens here is you are perceiving continuous motion between separate objects that is viewed in succession. So let me help you understand this with a kind of good example. So you have this phi phenomena here. So let's understand this. As you can see the rotating dots here. So it's a continuous motion and you are not able to find out which dot is rotating. So it's basically kind of creating an illusion about something that is continuously moving. So here we understand what is the phi phenomena. Now we'll move on to the next set of questions. The next set of questions is based on the passage. These are a kind of really challenging question for most of the students. Now, since UGC has introduced the passage concept in the recent years, most of the students are even afraid of touching the passage question because they feel it's so hard that we cannot attempt even a single of those. But believe me, this time the passage question was challenging, but it was much more based on your general knowledge rather than your knowledge on the subject of research methodology. So let's see and understand this passage first. So the examiner here tries to explain that psychologists want to develop a numerical ability test with 80 multiple choice questions which have 5 items. So there are 80 questions and each has 5 alternatives. So it's A, B, C, D, E. Okay. Now what happens is he tries to find out discrimination index and item remainder correlation. So 60 items were retained in the item relation. Now these 60 were administered to a new group of 400 students or 400 people 2 times in 8 weeks. So one today and one after 8 weeks. Okay. Now what happens? The test-retest correlation was 0.22. The data obtained by administration of 60 items was used for computing split half. Now test-retest is basically doing one today and after 8 weeks. So that is test-retest, and the split half is breaking it into 2. So you have odd and even. And the correlation was 0.6. Now the author says that this correlation you are trying to apply Spearman-Brown correction. Okay. And finally he says that whatever marks are obtained, okay, that are correlated with mathematics examination, and the product moment correlation is 0.6 between test scores and mathematics. So the scores obtained were correlated with mathematics scores and norms were developed, the mean for which was 40 and the standard deviation was 8. Okay. The data were normally distributed on a normal distribution curve and percentile ranks were obtained. Now let's move on to the set of questions. So the first question here talks about which of the following correlation is used for computing item remainder correlation here. So as we can see the item remainder correlation here, there are various choices. You can see phi coefficient, phi serial, point by serial. Okay. So what we will do here is, okay. So here is the set of correlation coefficients that we have talked about. So Just a second. So I'll move on to a new page indeed. So here are the various correlation methods that we must know. Okay. So in Pearson product moment, both interval ratio, both scales intervals should be given. Okay. Now let's understand what was there in the question. We are trying to find out. Here is the question. I'll put the question here. Okay. So here what we are trying to find out. We are trying to find out correlation for the item remainder correlation in the above analysis. So in the above thing there were two things. There were students versus the numerical ability score. Okay. So what is a student? There are four kinds of scales. Let me first explain those. Nominal scale, where you are just saying there are 10 students, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 10. Then is the ordinal scale where you are ranking the students. First, second, third. Okay. It's an extension of nominal. Then you have interval scales where you are giving the interval. For example, temperature on thermometer 10 degrees Celsius, 20 degrees Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius. Okay. Then is the ratio scale where you are trying to find out. It's an advancement of interval scale where you are trying to say if I am moving at a speed of 10 km per hour and my friend is moving at 20 km per hour, my friend is moving at twice as much my speed. Or if I say he is moving at 5 km, I can say he is moving at half as much of my speed. So at ratio scale we can say twice, half, and there should be an absolute zero from where you are referencing because 0 km per hour is a kind of stationary object. So these are the four scales. Now we say students. So students is a kind of nominal scale. And what is numerical ability test? Numerical ability test is indeed a interval scale. Okay, because you can say my friend is scoring 50, I am scoring 100, another one is scoring 20, but I cannot say a score of 0 on this scale will mean that the person does not have any ability. Okay, does not know any maths or does not have any numerical ability. So it's a kind of interval scale. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find out relation between two scales. One is nominal, other is interval. So when we try to find out relation when one is nominal and other is interval or ratio, the answer is point biserial. So here the answer would be point biserial correlation. Okay. So what is important here is you must know which type of correlation is applied with which scale. So gamma scale you have one nominal, one ordinal. So you must remember this table in order to answer such kind of questions. Okay. So that was the first question. Now the next question. The next question asks whether the test-retest reliability was good or not. Okay. So what was the score? The score on test-retest reliability was 0.22 at a significance of 0.01. That means 99% significant level. I can say at 99% significance, I can say reliability is 0.22. That means the reliability is very low. Or I can say it is a kind of unsatisfactory test-retest reliability because usually we say a good reliability lies from 0.5 to 0.7. So that is a direct answer. It looks very difficult, but it's simple. Now again, here is a question on calculation of percentile score of 48, percentile rank. Now, as we know in the question it is mentioned, you have a mean of, the mean is 40 and standard deviation is 8. That means one standard deviation would be 40 plus 8. So 48 and one negative standard deviation would be 40 minus 8. That is 32. Okay. Now this is a kind of very simple question. All you need to do is know is this curve. Okay. So here is, as we know that in the question it was directly mentioned, it's a kind of normal distribution. So here we gave the percentiles, and we this line is the mean, that is 40. So plus 8, one standard deviation. So here it would be 48. Here it would be plus 2 standard deviation, that is 48 plus 8 again. So that is 56. Okay, and here again it would be 40 plus 24. So that is 64. Okay, so 3 standard deviation would be 64. Here it would be 32. Then 32 minus 8 it would be 24, and then it would be 16 here. Now, the author asks, what would be the percentile rank for a score of 48? So, at this point, what is the percentile rank? So, percentile rank is given here directly. It's 84 percentile. So, we should know for a very simple reason, the percentile score is how much is the score below you. So, it's basically lower than you. So, if I say I have 84 percentile, that means there are 16 people who are above me and rest of them are below me. So that is a kind of score that we try to understand by percentile ranking. So here when I talk about percentile ranking, a simple conclusion that I can understand here is that, rather understand and remember I should say. So the percentile scores, let's understand for one positive standard deviation it's 84.1. 2 standard deviation is 97.7. 3 positive standard deviation is 99.9. Now go to minus 1 standard deviation is 15.9. Minus 2 standard deviation percentile would be 3.2, and minus 3 standard deviation percentile would be 0.1. Now this is different from percentage. If I talk about what lies between minus 1 to plus 1, if I say what lies between minus 1 to plus 1 standard deviation, so answer would be 68%. Then 2 standard deviation minus 2 to plus 2, the answer would be 95%, and 3 standard deviation it would be 99%. So that is in percent and this is percentile. So here is the brief difference between two, and all you need to know is this table. Also this diagram. The next question is again a very simple question. You just need to know the basic formula for Spearman-Brown correction. Now, before understanding that, we must know what is the Spearman-Brown correction and why do we need it. So, for example, I have an item with 100. I have a questionnaire with 100 items. If I perform a reliability test on it and I get an answer 0.8. Now, if I break it into two groups, odd and even, I have 50 items in each. Okay, when I am performing a reliability test, what would happen? The reliability would tend to go down because the number of items are less based on which I am giving the reliability. So, what does the Spearman-Brown correction talks about? Spearman-Brown correction talks about the same thing, that when you are splitting the things into something, the reliability changes. So if I want to double the length of the test, what would be the effect on reliability? So as mentioned in the passage, the split of reliability was 0.6. So the simple formula for Spearman-Brown correction is 2r by 1 plus r. Here 2 is two groups, so you have odd group and even group. So it's 2 into 0.6 divided by 1 plus 0.6. So it's 1.2 divided by 1.6. When you solve it, you get the answer 0.75. Now the last question based on the passage here. What is evidence? What evidence has been obtained for the validity? Now we need to know something about the validity. So how can we talk about validity? Validity, I can say that in this case what happens is the correlation is high. Okay, so correlation is 0.6, so it's good. Okay, that is one thing. Now there are two things, concurrent validity and predictive validity. What is the difference between the two? Predictive validity is when I am trying to predict something theoretically. Okay, so for example here in the passage it was given that I am trying to correlate the test score with maths score and trying to predict what would be the score in mathematics. So it's basically kind of predictive validity that we are talking about here, because it's not a concurrent validity, we are not taking two things together. So it's a kind of predictive validity, and again, since the correlation is high, it is kind of satisfactory. So it's a satisfactory predictive validity. So these were the set of the 20 questions, last set of 20 questions that we discussed today for UGC paper 2, which is considered to be an easy paper for psychology. We would be moving to the next set, that is the UGC paper 3, which is kind of core research paper, and it's kind of much more difficult and challenging as compared to paper 2. So we have 75 questions there. We will be breaking that class in 5 parts. We will be discussing 15 questions in one set. So stay tuned for more sessions. Have a good day ahead.